Have you ever watched a whole neighborhood lock its doors? Not because of a storm, but because of something lost and frightened, running wild in the rain. On the night thunder shook Oakwood, a big golden retriever, soaked, limping, chased by fear and flashlights, became the most wanted soul in town. Rumors swirled, windows slammed shut, and the community turned on a dog they no longer remembered by name. But one old man heard something different in the storm, a cry for help, not a threat. Tonight, join us for a story about fear, patience, and the healing power of kindness, because sometimes the most misunderstood heart is the one most worth saving. No one in Oakwood slept easy when the thunder came. That night, rain battered the rows of little houses and lightning turned the clouds white with fury, casting restless shadows across trembling window panes. In every home, doors were double-locked, lights left burning late, as if a lamp could push back the primal dread that gripped the neighborhood. Even the bravest children slept curled up close to their parents, while nervous adults watched weather alerts and community message boards, scrolling through the growing storm of rumors. At the heart of the panic was not just the thunder. It was the golden blur people had seen weaving through the rain, a big, soaked golden retriever, wild-eyed and mud-streaked, moving from trash can to shadow. For days, neighbors whispered about this dangerous dog, each telling their own version of the story. Some said he'd growled at a jogger, others swore he'd chased a cat or lunged at someone's fence. No one remembered his name, only that he'd once belonged to the new folks on Sycamore Lane, the ones who'd vanished in the night and left their pet behind. Now he was a ghost on four paws, a threat lurking in the wet darkness. Even before tonight's storm, people kept their distance. Now every sudden noise seemed to confirm their fears. A trash can toppled in the alley behind Maple Street, its metal lid clattering against concrete. The wind whipped, a woman screamed, high, sharp, a thread of panic unraveling in the night. Then came the frantic barking, a golden shape dashing across lawns and leaping over a low hedge, chased by the piercing glare of a police spotlight. Tires screeched, flashlights darted. The commotion sent the neighbors to their windows, curtains trembling in the gusts, faces pale and breath held. On the neighborhood app, posts stacked up faster than the rain could wash them away. Has anyone seen that big stray? Animal control needs to take care of him now. He was in our yard scaring my kids. Keep yours inside. Something needs to be done. Can't even walk to the mailbox. By midnight, fear ruled Oakwood. The block felt smaller, tighter, as if every locked door was a signal that trust itself was under siege. Parents kept their children home from sleepovers, dogs barked at shadows, and the community's collective heart pounded in time with the relentless rain. On screens and behind closed curtains, people began to point fingers. It was easier than admitting they were afraid. But not everyone saw danger in the night. At the far end of Pine Court, in a sagging one-story house with peeling green paint, Franklin Reed sat alone, the storm reflected in his weary eyes. He'd lost his wife 2 winters ago, and since then, the house felt too big, every clock ticked too loud. The old armchair beside the window, her chair, remained untouched, a silent monument to better times. As the wind rattled the gutters and the neighbors' shouts carried on the air, Franklin heard something else. A howl, piercing and raw, threaded with something he understood too well. Not violence, not hunger, loss. He set down his mug and shuffled to the porch, raincoat thrown over his flannel pajamas, and stood in the downpour. In the distance, the police cars moved on, their searchlight beams vanishing down another street. But the dog remained, somewhere out there, crying out to a world that wanted him gone. Franklin listened, heart twisting with a pang of recognition. He knew that sound, the sound of a heart that had lost everything and didn't know how to ask for help. All his life, Franklin had been the quiet type, the one who fixed neighbors' fences or mowed a widow's lawn without being asked. He wasn't the kind to join angry mobs or spread gossip. Instead, he reached for his late wife's old harmonica, its brass dulled by years of gentle fingers. He sat on his porch, letting the rain soak his hair, and played a slow, aching tune, a song she'd loved, back when their house was full of laughter. Across the street, a pair of yellow eyes flickered in the darkness. The dog, Sonny, though only Franklin remembered the name, stood shivering beneath a sycamore, ears back, tail tucked so hard it almost disappeared. He was ragged now, ribs showing through his soaked fur, limping on one back paw. The harmonica's melody floated on the wind, tentative and strange. Sonny edged closer, muscles taut as bowstrings, as if torn between hope and terror. A sudden clap of thunder sent the dog bolting again, vanishing into the maze of backyards and alleyways. Franklin set down the harmonica and watched the place where Sonny had been, feeling that familiar ache, the knowledge that kindness can't always reach the wounded on the first try. Behind him, his phone buzzed with a dozen new notifications. More calls for animal control, more rumors. No one was asking the question that mattered. Was Sonny truly dangerous, or just desperately misunderstood? Franklin stood on his porch until the storm began to ease, the rain softening to a gentle patter, the neighborhood falling silent except for the distant hum of police radios. Somewhere out there, a scared dog faced the world alone, hunted by fear and a community that had forgotten how to see the difference between threat and sorrow. Franklin couldn't forget. He wouldn't. He whispered into the night, unsure if the dog or anyone would ever hear him. "You're not alone out there. Not tonight. Not as long as I'm here." The storm rolled on, but in Franklin's heart, a quiet resolve began to take root. The howl of loss echoed back, and this time he promised himself he would answer it. The storm left Oakwood battered and uneasy. Dawn brought only a brief, gray quiet before new rumors began to coil through the neighborhood, tighter and meaner than ever. By breakfast time, the community app had exploded with fresh reports. Deep claw marks gouged in Mrs. Klein's shed door, the Johnsons' old tabby cat nowhere to be found. Some claimed they'd seen fur on the fence, muddy paw prints smeared across driveways. People traded fearful glances in the street, every neighbor a little more on edge, every child ushered back inside. The fear wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about something wild, unpredictable, and loose. That kind of fear had a way of seeping into everything, even the air. And for the first time in years, the residents of Oakwood locked their doors in the morning, not just at night. Franklin Reed watched all this unfold from his kitchen window, cradling a cup of reheated coffee, his hands wrapped around the mug as if it could ward off a chill he couldn't shake. His house felt quieter than usual, a stillness that was less peace and more absence. The photos on the wall, the old scarf hanging on the coat rack, the half-knitted blanket abandoned in the basket by the sofa, each a reminder of the life that used to fill these rooms. He thought of his wife, Eleanor, and the gentle way she had with strays. Over the years, she'd coaxed countless frightened animals into their yard with nothing more than a soft voice and scraps of food. She believed every lost soul, man or beast, deserved a second chance. Franklin sometimes wondered if she'd married him out of the same conviction. Now, alone, the memories weighed heavy. He missed the warmth of her laughter, her easy patience, the way she'd fill up a space simply by loving it. Sometimes, on mornings like this, the ache felt sharp enough to pierce him clean through. The world outside seemed just as wounded, just as restless. But Franklin didn't join the calls for action, didn't log on to complain or shout. Instead, he set about his morning ritual. He gathered up the leftover roast chicken from last night's dinner and, after a moment's thought, scooped out a generous helping. Then, shrugging into his worn jacket, he shuffled onto the porch and laid the food by the steps, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. He paused, then pulled his harmonica from his pocket and sat down, legs creaking. The melody he played was soft, the kind of song meant to coax comfort from silence rather than to fill it. His notes drifted over the damp lawn and through the tangles of wild rose along the fence. Somewhere, just beyond the edge of the yard, Franklin felt the hair on his arms rise. A pair of eyes glinted in the weak sunlight. Yellow, watchful, wary. Sonny crouched behind the faded hydrangea bush, body low to the ground, paws muddy, his ribs showing even more plainly now in the morning light. He didn't move toward the food, not at first. He watched the house, the porch, every window, as if expecting an ambush. Franklin kept playing, never meeting the dog's gaze directly. He'd learned long ago, trust is a delicate thing, easy to break and nearly impossible to force. His harmonica faltered on a note, and he chuckled quietly, remembering how Eleanor used to tease him about his clumsy fingers. The dog edged forward, step by cautious step, muscles tense and ready to bolt at any sudden movement. He sniffed the air, ears flicking back and forth, every sense on high alert. Franklin could see now that Sonny's coat was matted and dirty, patches of dried blood where he'd scratched too hard or gotten snagged on brambles. The sight squeezed Franklin's heart, flooding him with a mix of helplessness and determination. At last, hunger overcame fear. Sonny darted to the steps, grabbed a mouthful of chicken, and retreated just as quickly, devouring the food from a safe distance. Franklin let him be, didn't try to speak or move closer. He simply played his harmonica, the mournful notes carrying across the yard, a small gesture of peace in a world too full of suspicion. As the morning wore on, Franklin busied himself with chores, watering Eleanor's rose bushes, sweeping the porch, fixing the loose slat in the back gate. Every so often, he'd catch a glimpse of Sonny lurking nearby, never far enough to risk touch, but never quite disappearing either. The dance of trust had begun, measured in inches and stolen glances. Inside the house, Franklin found himself talking to the silence. "He's more afraid than dangerous," he murmured, almost as if answering the unspoken questions from his neighbors. "Ain't that always the way?" That afternoon, the sky turned heavy with rain once more, and Franklin sat by the window with a battered paperback, reading aloud to the empty room. His voice was rough at first, but it smoothed as he lost himself in the story, a habit he and Eleanor had shared. Sometimes, as the words drifted out, he imagined she was still there, listening, knitting needles clacking softly beside him. Outside, Sonny circled the yard, drawn by the sound of a voice that held no threat, only gentle persistence. He pressed close to the fence, eyes never leaving the old man's face, and for a brief, hopeful moment, Franklin thought he saw the dog's tail give a tentative wag. But trust, Franklin knew, was built slowly. He'd learned that with Eleanor, too. Love was a patient, daily thing. Every small kindness mattered. As dusk fell, he left another plate of food on the porch and watched from the shadows as Sonny crept forward, drawn by hunger and the faint memory of better days. That night, Franklin sat on the porch again, harmonica in hand, watching the darkness for a flash of gold. He thought about all he'd lost, the mistakes he'd made, the moments he wished he could reclaim. He wondered, not for the first time, if helping this wounded dog might somehow help him find his way back to himself. Out there in the hush of night, Sonny watched with outcast eyes, caught between terror and longing, and Franklin waited, offering patience instead of panic, hope instead of judgment, quietly believing that sometimes saving a lost soul was the only way to save your own. Days slipped by in Oakwood with a nervous sort of quiet, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The community's panic never fully disappeared. Parents still hurried their kids inside at dusk, and every stray shadow seemed to send someone posting on the neighborhood app. Yet outside the digital noise on a faded porch at the end of Pine Court, something very different was unfolding. Franklin Reed kept to his gentle rituals. Every morning before sunrise, he'd set out a fresh plate, sometimes leftover roast chicken, sometimes bits of ham or a scoop of scrambled eggs. Some days he'd sit outside and read aloud, letting the rise and fall of his voice drift into the hedges and flower beds, where he knew Sonny hid and listened. When the sun dipped low, Franklin pulled out his harmonica, playing tunes that wove through the air like prayers. He never forced contact. He never tried to catch or corner Sonny, though sometimes he ached to do so, just to ease the dog's hunger, to wash the filth from his fur, to let him know that the world could be kind again. But Franklin understood. Trust is grown, not grabbed. Instead, he focused on small, steady gestures, day after day. Sonny responded in his own cautious ways. Each time the dog came a little closer. Never straight to the food, but circling, watching, creeping forward by inches. The sound of Franklin's harmonica seemed to comfort him, though loud noises or sudden movements sent him skittering back into the bushes, heart pounding and sides heaving. Sometimes, at twilight, Franklin would spot Sonny sitting just on the edge of the porch light, head tilted, ears flicked forward, listening intently as Franklin spoke to the quiet. The routine became a dance of patience and longing. For Franklin, every small sign of progress, a plate licked clean, a paw print on the porch, a flicker of a tail, became a reason to hope. But there were days of setback, too. A loud thunderclap, a neighbor's shouts, the distant bark of another dog. On those days, Sonny would vanish for hours, sometimes for a full day, and Franklin would worry, his chest tight with a familiar ache. He knew about disappearing acts. He knew about running away when the world seemed too cruel. Inside the house, Franklin kept busy. He polished Eleanor's old picture frames and dusted her collection of blue glass bottles. He worked the soil in her rose garden, clearing weeds and whispering apologies to the blooms for not tending them sooner. Sometimes he sat by the living room window, hands folded over his knees, and thought about the family he'd let drift away. His grown son, the grandchildren he barely knew, the brother he hadn't spoken to since the funeral. The empty rooms echoed with things unsaid. One evening, as Franklin sat on the porch reading the weathered pages of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, he realized he'd been reading aloud to himself for nearly an hour. The words fell softly into the dusk, and for a moment, he wondered if anyone, or anything, was listening. A quiet rustle in the bushes drew his attention. Sonny emerged, moving with the wariness of an animal who'd learned the world could hurt him without warning. He stopped at the edge of the steps, ears flat, every muscle coiled. Franklin kept his eyes on the book, his voice steady but low, not daring to glance up. He read the next paragraph, pausing only for breath. And then, slowly, miraculously, Sonny sat down. Franklin's heart thudded so loudly he thought for sure the dog would bolt. But Sonny stayed. He watched Franklin with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, his golden fur matted and tangled, old scars peeking through the dirty patches. In that hush, a fragile connection took root, not built from words, but from simple presence, from the willingness to just be together in the open air. For several nights, the pattern repeated. Franklin would play a gentle tune or read aloud, and Sonny would draw nearer, always alert, always with a way out. Franklin never reached for him, never tried to rush what was growing between them. The dog's trust was a fragile thing, and Franklin treated it like the rarest bloom in Eleanor's garden. But Franklin couldn't help reflecting on his own pain as he watched Sonny. He saw, with almost unbearable clarity, how much of his own life had been spent in silence, hiding grief, swallowing regret, pretending that time would heal what only connection could touch. He wished he'd done more for his family, wished he'd held Eleanor longer, spoken softer to his son, written letters to his brother. Sometimes, late at night, Franklin lay awake wondering if helping Sonny could help heal something inside himself that he'd long thought broken beyond repair. It was on one of these long, restless nights that Franklin noticed something he hadn't seen before. As Sonny edged into the glow of the porch light, Franklin caught a glimpse of faded scars running along the dog's flank, old wounds, not just from the past weeks on the street, but from months or years of suffering. There were marks that looked like they'd come from rope burns, others that suggested kicks or harsh blows. Understanding flooded Franklin, cold and bitter. Sonny's aggression, his jumpiness, his refusal to trust. It wasn't some defect or evidence of danger. It was the natural response of a soul who'd been mistreated, who'd survived by learning to expect pain. Franklin felt something inside him crack open, a blend of anger at the world and fierce protectiveness for the broken creature now sitting a few feet away. He set down his book, let the silence settle. Sonny's eyes met his for a moment. So much fear, so much hope. Franklin nodded, as if to say, "I see you. I know how it feels." They sat there until the stars came out, two battered survivors sharing a porch, connected not by words, but by the deep, silent understanding that only those who've known real pain can share. Franklin made a quiet promise, not just to Sonny, but to himself. This time he would stay. He would show up. He would not let fear have the last word. It rained all afternoon in Oakwood, the kind of relentless drizzle that blurred the edges of houses and turned yards into muddy pools. Franklin Reed sat by his window, harmonica resting on his lap, watching streaks of water chase each other down the glass. He thought about Sonny, somewhere out there, soaked to the bone, shivering under someone's porch or huddled beneath a hedge. Franklin's own bones ached with the knowledge that even now, after days of effort, trust could wash away as quickly as chalk in a storm. But the quiet that had settled over Franklin's house wasn't just about the weather. It was the kind of silence that came when you were waiting for something to change, when hope and dread existed side by side in the heart. Today, Franklin felt them both, heavy as the clouds overhead. As dusk approached, Franklin made a decision. He moved through the familiar rituals, heating up some leftover chicken, filling a bowl with clean water, and wiping the rain off the old porch steps. But this time, he left the front door slightly ajar, letting a warm yellow wedge of lamplight spill onto the porch and into the misty yard. Then, with a soft sigh, he sat in his usual chair and opened the newspaper, pretending to read while his ears strained for every sound beyond the threshold. The rain drummed steadily. Somewhere out there, the world's most misunderstood dog moved through the shadows. Minutes ticked by, 10, then 20, while Franklin's coffee cooled beside him and the night crept closer. He began to doubt, to question if he'd misjudged, if the dog's wounds were simply too deep to bridge. Maybe Sonny would never trust him. Maybe, like so many before, he'd learned that every open door was a trick, every outstretched hand a trap. But just as Franklin was about to close the door and call it a night, he heard it, a tentative, scraping sound on the porch, followed by the softest whimper. Franklin's heart jumped. He stilled every muscle, barely breathing. Through the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of gold. Sonny's nose poked over the threshold, whiskers trembling, eyes wide and wary. The dog stood there for a long moment, half in, half out, the rain matting his fur and dripping in little puddles around his paws. He sniffed the air, trying to decide if the comfort inside was worth the risk. Franklin didn't speak or move. He just waited, sending out all the calm he could muster. The kind of patience Eleanor had always preached. The kind that saved lives, if you were brave enough to let it. Finally, hunger and exhaustion won out. Sonny took a single shaky step inside, then another, drawn by the scent of food and the fragile promise of safety. Franklin's heart thudded in his chest, louder than any thunderstorm. He let his eyes drift down to the page, letting the dog feel invisible, unthreatened. For a full minute, Sonny ate in silence, every muscle ready to bolt at the slightest sound. Franklin didn't move, didn't speak. When the food was gone, Sonny looked up, eyes haunted and pleading. It was then, when the dog seemed at his smallest and most broken, that Franklin took a chance. Slowly, he extended his hand, palm open, letting Sonny sniff. The dog flinched, then, after a breathless pause, allowed Franklin's fingertips to graze the top of his head. Sonny's fur was coarse and tangled, and he trembled so hard Franklin thought his heart might break. But for a handful of seconds, the contact held. Sonny stood perfectly still, eyes closing in what seemed like a memory of comfort. Then, as if the reality was too much to bear, he darted away, slipping out the door and back into the dark. Franklin's hand shook as he pulled it back, and without warning, tears slipped down his cheeks. He wept for the dog, for himself, for every wounded thing that had ever run from kindness. The tears were hot, stinging, but Franklin let them fall. He hadn't cried, not really, since Eleanor's funeral. Tonight, the dam finally broke. He stayed on the porch long after Sonny was gone, lost in the ache of release. He understood now. Some wounds never healed all the way. Some scars lived beneath the skin, invisible but aching with every memory. He thought of all the things he and Eleanor had survived, the lean years, the miscarriages, the arguments that left invisible bruises. He remembered how she'd always said, "You can't rush a broken heart. You have to sit with it. Let it know you're not leaving." Franklin whispered those words to the empty night, as if Sonny, or perhaps Eleanor, might hear. The next day, Franklin woke early, hope fluttering timidly in his chest. He set out fresh water and food, swept the porch, and left the door ajar, just in case. But the yard remained empty, the food untouched, and the only sound was the wind rattling the branches. Hours passed. Doubt crept in, sharp and cold. Maybe he'd asked too much. Maybe the first touch had pushed Sonny further away. As night fell, the fear gnawed at Franklin. But deep down, he remembered what Eleanor had taught him. Trust wasn't a straight road. Some days you moved forward. Other days, you circled back. Healing didn't happen in a single night. Not for dogs, not for old men, not for anyone. He told himself to be patient, to keep the door open, and to trust that one moment of connection could echo longer than 100 nights of fear. He waited in the quiet, humming a tune for the lonely, broken souls of the world. And though Sonny did not return that night, Franklin held fast to hope, letting his own scars teach him to wait. one slow, steady heartbeat at a time. The morning after Sonny's brief, fragile breakthrough, Franklin awoke to the smell of rain-soaked earth and the persistent ache in his chest that always followed a day of hope and disappointment. The food bowl on the porch remained untouched, the water only disturbed by falling leaves. Sonny was gone. No paw prints, no signs he'd slept nearby. Just the quiet hush of an ordinary day trying to pretend nothing strange had happened. Franklin spent the morning in slow motion, every step shadowed by worry. He raked the soggy yard, humming an old tune under his breath, and checked the alleys and bushes where Sonny sometimes hid. Each time he thought he saw a flash of gold, his heart would leap, only to realize it was just sunlight slipping through wet branches. Still, Franklin set a plate of scrambled eggs out near the porch. "In case you're hungry," he murmured, "I'll wait." But Oakwood was not a place that waited kindly. The fear that had once been a whisper now rose up like a tidal wave, crashing through block meetings, buzzing from porch to porch. The stories grew. Someone claimed to have seen Sonny digging in the community garden. Another swore she'd found his fur tangled in her daughter's swing set. The missing cat was still gone, and the shed's claw marks had become a badge of collective dread. It was only a matter of time before someone acted. That afternoon, as Franklin sat on his porch, lost in thought and sorrow, a sharp rap at his door startled him. He found 2 animal control officers waiting at the bottom of his steps. One was young, bored, fiddling with his radio. The other, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, looked at Franklin with a blend of sympathy and authority. "Morning, Mr. Reed. We've had reports that you've been feeding that stray dog." Franklin recognized the older man, Officer Mathers, who used to deliver groceries to Eleanor when she was too sick to shop. Mathers had once admired Eleanor's way with animals, but today, duty pulled tight on his features. "Yes, I've been putting food out," Franklin replied, voice steady. "He's not a stray, he's lost, hurt." Mathers sighed, pulling out a battered notebook. "I get it, Frank, but there's panic in the neighborhood. Kids are scared. Folks want answers. Official word is, if that dog's seen here again, especially on your property, we're required to intervene." Franklin felt the heat rising in his chest. "He's not dangerous. He's terrified. Just give him time." The younger officer snorted, but Mathers cut him a look. "I remember your wife, Frank. She'd be the first to defend a lost soul. I don't like this any more than you do, but you need to know, you're in a senior complex with strict rules. They're saying if you keep harboring this animal, you could be evicted." The words hit Franklin like a punch. The thought of losing his home, the last place he'd shared with Eleanor, filled him with cold dread. But the idea of abandoning Sonny to the fate everyone wanted for him was worse. "I need more time," Franklin said quietly. "Just a little longer." Mathers' face softened for a moment. "Look, I can give you 24 hours. After that, I can't look the other way anymore. It's not just up to me." Franklin nodded, his heart pounding in his ears. "Thank you, Tom." As the officers left, Franklin slumped onto the porch, feeling the weight of 100 lifetimes pressed down on his shoulders. The neighborhood felt hostile now, every drawn curtain a threat, every hushed voice an accusation. He sat for a long while, staring at the empty bowl and the road beyond, wondering what he could possibly do in just one day. Late in the afternoon, as gray clouds threatened another round of rain, Franklin saw Mrs. Eldridge, his neighbor 2 doors down, on the sidewalk, glaring at him with pursed lips. She crossed the street to avoid his house, gathering her grandchildren close as if his porch itself were dangerous. Franklin watched, feeling a bitter sting. He'd lived here 20 years, always quick with a wave or a helping hand. Yet fear had erased all memory of kindness. Back inside, Franklin called his son, Jacob, desperate for advice or comfort. Jacob answered on the third ring, voice gruff and tired. "Dad, you can't risk your home for a dog. Let animal control do their job. This isn't your fight." Franklin felt anger rise, hot, defensive, but then it fizzled into regret. "Jacob, I never did enough for you or your mother. I always played it safe. Maybe it's time I took a risk for someone who needs me." Jacob was silent, then sighed. "I just don't want to see you hurt, Dad. Please, think about what you're giving up." After hanging up, Franklin paced the living room, mind racing. The minutes ticked by too fast. The house seemed to shrink, its walls closing in, every memory of Eleanor a silent plea to keep fighting. He remembered the way she'd once told him, after a sick kitten had scratched her hands bloody, "We don't get to choose who needs us. We only get to choose whether we answer." As dusk settled over Oakwood, Franklin sat by the window, eyes trained on the yard. He watched for Sonny, praying for a sign, desperate for a miracle. He rehearsed what he'd say if the officers returned, or if angry neighbors came knocking. His nerves sang with dread, but underneath, a stubborn hope pulsed. Maybe, just maybe, he could prove everyone wrong. That night, as rain began to fall again, Franklin left the porch light burning. He kept the door unlocked and food by the steps. He promised himself, as the thunder rumbled in the distance, that if Sonny returned, he would not let fear or threats take away one more thing worth saving. 24 hours. That was all he had. But sometimes, Franklin thought, that's all it takes to change everything. Overnight, the rain cleansed Oakwood's streets, but not its anxieties. By sunrise, the news of animal control's warning and Franklin's possible eviction swept through the neighborhood like wildfire. People gathered in driveways, whispered behind hedges, and speculated over coffee. Some nodded with grim satisfaction, convinced they'd stood up for their family's safety. Others looked troubled, quietly remembering the times Franklin had brought soup to their sick relatives or helped patch up a leaky roof. The town was no longer united, if it ever truly had been. Instead, lines formed. Those who believed in second chances, and those who trusted only in rules and order. Online arguments grew heated. Some defended Franklin, calling him a good soul, just like his wife. Others posted photos of claw marks and overturned trash cans, fanning the flames of fear. Inside his small house, Franklin sat at the kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice Mathers had quietly slipped under his door that morning. 24 hours. It felt both like a death sentence and a dare. The urge to give up, to pack his things and disappear before the humiliation became too much, pressed on his chest. But then he remembered Sonny's trembling body beneath his hand, the silent plea in the dog's eyes. And he remembered Eleanor, her faith that kindness could outlast anything. That morning, Jacob arrived. Franklin's son was taller than him now, gray just beginning to fleck his beard, worry lines etched deep around his mouth. He closed the door quietly and set his bag down with a sigh. "Dad, this is getting out of hand. You can't fix every broken thing in this world." Franklin met his gaze. "No, but I can choose not to break something else." Jacob shook his head. "What happens if you get evicted? Where will you go? Why risk everything for a dog you barely know?" Franklin hesitated, his voice softer than he meant. "Because I do know him, Jacob. More than you think. He's scared, hurt, and trying to survive the only way he knows. When I look at Sonny, I see myself after your mother died. I pushed everyone away. If someone hadn't been patient with me, if Eleanor hadn't been patient, I wouldn't have made it. Maybe this is my turn to be that person." For a long moment, Jacob just looked at him, frustration and love warring on his face. "I just want you to be safe. I want to help, Dad, but—" Franklin put a hand on his son's arm. "Help me by trusting I'm doing what I need to." Outside, the weather broke into an unexpected streak of sunlight. Franklin, needing fresh air and clarity, stepped onto the porch. To his surprise, a small group of neighbors had gathered across the street, quietly debating. Mrs. Alvarez, who had lost her husband last year, stepped forward and handed Franklin a plate of cookies. "I remember when Eleanor nursed my cat back from the brink," she said softly. "Don't let them scare you. Not everyone wants Sonny gone." Others watched from their windows, some with hope, some with suspicion. Two kids, siblings from next door, lingered at the edge of the yard, tossing a rubber ball back and forth, stealing glances at Franklin and his porch. The tension in the air felt thick, uncertain, but Franklin saw in those small moments the possibility for understanding. Later that afternoon, Franklin sat on the steps, reading softly and letting the air settle. The siblings lingered, curiosity overcoming fear. Franklin smiled, motioning for them to sit. "You don't have to be scared. He's just a dog who needs a friend." As if on cue, Sonny appeared at the corner of the house, cautious but watching. The younger child, a girl with braids, froze. Franklin spoke gently. "He won't hurt you. Watch." He set a ball down on the grass and rolled it toward Sonny. The dog hesitated, then, perhaps sensing the gentle tone, took a step forward, sniffed the ball, and gave it a tentative nudge. The children gasped, the girl giggled, and Sonny, encouraged, tried again, pushing the ball closer with his nose. It was a small moment, almost laughably ordinary, but for those watching, it was proof that even the most wounded creatures could remember how to play. Franklin felt hope stir. Maybe there was still time. But Oakwood was not done with its ghosts. As the sun set, a black pickup truck rolled slowly down the street. Franklin's stomach turned cold when he saw the man at the wheel, a thick-set figure with a scar across his chin, eyes hard and searching. The dog shrank back at the sight of the truck, tail tucked, body trembling. The truck stopped, engine idling. The man got out, his voice carrying across the quiet block. "Looking for a dog, big golden mutt, belongs to me." His tone was threatening, the words less a question than a warning. Neighbors watched from their windows. Franklin stood between Sonny and the man, every muscle in his body tensed. The man's eyes swept the porch, landing on the children, the ball, and then Sonny. He spat on the ground. "That mutt ruined my life. If I see him on my property again, I'll finish the job." Franklin stepped forward, voice steady. "You're not welcome here. Sonny isn't going anywhere." The man glared, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "This isn't over, old man." He stalked back to his truck and peeled away, tires screeching as he disappeared down the block. The moment hung in the air, thick with adrenaline. The kids scrambled back to their parents, neighbors leaned out of doors, some emboldened, others whispering behind hands. Franklin knelt beside Sonny, who pressed close, shivering. That night, Oakwood was divided. Some called the police, reporting the threat. Others comforted Franklin, quietly pledging support. In the dark, Franklin stroked Sonny's fur and whispered, "We're not alone, boy. Not anymore." But he knew the danger had only grown. The town was watching, waiting, and so was the past, determined to finish what it had started. That night, Oakwood seemed to hold its breath. The wind rattled loose shutters, and every creak of a branch sent nerves jangling. Franklin sat at his window, with the lamp turned low, a mug of tea warming his tired hands. Sonny lay curled in the shadowy space beside the old sofa, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but never fully at peace. Franklin had started leaving the door cracked just enough for Sonny to slip in and out. It was an unspoken agreement. Trust, but never full surrender. Outside, the street was strangely quiet. The usual chorus of crickets was drowned out by distant sirens and the hum of a police cruiser making its slow circuit. Franklin's phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, some warning him not to let his sentiment endanger the community. He scrolled past them, feeling the pressure in his chest mount with every hour. Sleep would not come. Franklin moved to the porch, wrapping himself in an old blanket. The night was thick, almost suffocating, the air pulsing with unsaid things. He stared into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement, any flash of gold that meant Sonny was still safe. He thought of Eleanor, of her voice saying, "Trust your heart, even when it hurts." He wished she were here now, telling him what to do. It must have been near midnight when Franklin noticed it. The gate at the side of the yard stood open, swinging in the breeze. He'd closed it hours ago. Panic prickled up his spine. He bolted to his feet, calling softly, "Sonny? Sonny, boy?" His voice was swallowed by the hush of the sleeping neighborhood. Inside, Sonny was gone. The blanket still warm, but the dog had vanished without a sound. Franklin's heart hammered in his chest. He searched every room, every corner, whispering the name into empty spaces. He hurried outside. Rain beginning to spit from the low clouds. The gate creaked. Someone had opened it. Maybe left it that way. Maybe forced it. Franklin's mind raced. Was it the abuser, the man from the truck? Was it a neighbor trying to solve the problem themselves? Or did Sonny simply slip away, too scared to risk more kindness? He pulled on his boots and raincoat, barely feeling the chill. With a flashlight in one hand and hope in the other, he set out into the night, calling quietly for Sonny as he passed darkened houses and shuttered windows. Every shadow looked like danger. Every alley was a trap, but Franklin pressed on, refusing to let fear win. He moved from street to street, ignoring the ache in his legs and the wetness seeping through his socks. At Maple Lane, he saw tire tracks in the mud, fresh and deep. At the edge of the park, he heard a bark, thin and desperate. He followed it, heart pounding. In the alley behind the old grocery store, Franklin found the truck. Its headlights were off, but the engine still ticked. At the far end of the alley, Sonny cowered against a wall, cornered by his former abuser. The man stood over him, stick in hand, his voice low and ugly. "You ruined everything for me, Mutt. You're not getting away again." Sonny's eyes were wide, his body pressed flat to the ground, tail tucked so far under that it nearly disappeared. Franklin's anger flared, hot and pure, overpowering the fear and exhaustion. Without thinking, he shouted, "Hey, get away from him!" The man turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Old man, this ain't your business." Franklin didn't back down. "It is now. Leave him alone." The man sneered and raised the stick, aiming for Sonny. In that instant, Franklin's world narrowed to a single point. He saw not just a scared dog, but every time he'd failed to protect, every regret he'd carried for years. With a burst of energy he didn't know he still had, Franklin lunged forward, putting himself between the man and Sonny. The stick came down, catching Franklin hard on the forearm. He gasped at the sharp pain, but didn't move. "You're not hurting him again," he growled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The rain fell harder, soaking all three. Sonny whined, ears flat, but he didn't run. Instead, as if emboldened by Franklin's presence, the dog struggled to his feet and pressed close to Franklin's side, body trembling but unbroken. The abuser glared at them, frustration etched deep in his face. "You're both pathetic," he spat, before backing away toward the truck. He slammed the door and peeled out of the alley, tires spinning in the rain. Franklin sank to his knees, clutching his arm, breath coming in ragged bursts. Sonny whimpered and nudged his face, licking his cheek as if to say thank you, as if to apologize for every moment he doubted. Franklin wrapped his good arm around the dog's neck and held on tight, letting the warmth and weight of Sonny's body remind him that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. They stayed like that for several minutes. The world narrowed to pain and relief and the sound of rain on concrete. When Franklin finally stood, his legs shook, but Sonny stayed by his side, tail wagging weakly. Together they made their way home, limping through empty streets, the first hint of dawn breaking over Oakwood. Franklin's arm throbbed, but he didn't care. The look in Sonny's eyes, trusting, grateful, fiercely loyal, meant more than any comfort or safety. At last they reached the porch. Franklin unlocked the door, ushered Sonny inside, and collapsed onto the sofa. He stroked the dog's fur, whispering, "You're safe now. I promise." For the first time since Eleanor died, Franklin felt something like peace settling over him. He had chosen courage over fear, love over safety, and Sonny had chosen to believe, one soul rescuing another in the darkest part of the night. Outside, Oakwood began to wake to the news of what had happened. The block was about to learn just how far one old man and one broken dog would go for each other. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the living room wall as Franklin struggled to wake. His arm, thickly bandaged and cradled in a sling, ached with every tiny movement, but the pain was strangely reassuring, a small price for the choice he'd made. For the first time in ages, the old house was not empty. The steady weight of Sonny pressed against his legs, the dog's chest rising and falling in deep, exhausted sleep. The previous night felt like a half-remembered nightmare. The cold rain, the flashing stick, the pain that flared through Franklin's bones. But what lingered stronger was the memory of Sonny's body pressed against his. The way the dog had refused to run, had stayed to protect as much as be protected. They were bonded now, their scars and fears entwined. A gentle knock at the door startled Franklin awake. He sat up, wincing as Sonny tensed, ears flicking toward the sound. On the porch, he found Officer Mathers and a woman in scrubs with a first aid kit. Mathers' expression was somewhere between apology and admiration. "Heard about what happened, Frank. Word spreads fast in this town. Hospitals packed with flu cases, but I got Dr. Chen here to patch you up." Franklin tried to protest, but Dr. Chen gave him a look that silenced arguments. She cleaned and rebandaged his arm, checking for fractures, and insisted he rest. "You're lucky, Mr. Reed. That dog's loyalty probably saved your life." She ruffled Sonny's ears and smiled. "Looks like you saved each other." When they left, Franklin felt something had shifted. The street outside, once hostile, now filled with soft curiosity. Neighbors he barely knew lingered on the sidewalk, peeking through hedges, murmuring about what they'd heard, about the fight in the alley, the old man who stood up to a monster, the dog who waited through the night. Word of Sonny's vigil traveled even faster than the news of the attack. For 2 days, while Franklin rested in the hospital, Sonny camped on the concrete just outside the entrance, refusing to leave even for food or water. Nurses took pictures and posted them online, and soon the story spread, first to Oakwood, then beyond. "Dog refuses to leave injured man's side," one headline read. Another, "Golden Retriever's loyalty melts town's icy heart." Neighbors came to the hospital to see for themselves. Kids left drawings and dog treats in a pile near the door. The local bakery sent fresh bread to Franklin's house, and someone dropped off a card signed by half the neighborhood. Even some who had called animal control now sent messages of support. Mrs. Eldridge, once icy, left a pie on Franklin's porch and a note. "Thank you for reminding us what loyalty looks like." But the old fears were not gone completely. Sonny still startled at sudden movements. If a door slammed, he bolted under the table. When a man in a black jacket passed on the sidewalk, Sonny pressed against Franklin, body tense and wary. Yet every day, the dog grew a little calmer. Every gentle word, every game of catch in the yard, seemed to smooth away a little more of his fear. And Franklin, his arm in a sling, moving slower but more purposeful, felt a new strength blooming inside. He'd always believed change was for the young, but now he saw it could come at any age, in any shape. The town was watching, waiting to see if forgiveness could really outlast suspicion. The abuser was gone for good, reported by multiple neighbors and banned from Oakwood. For the first time in a long time, the street felt safe. At sunset, Franklin and Sonny would walk together, neighbors waving, children running ahead with sticks and balls, laughter echoing through yards that had once echoed only with warning. One afternoon after his return from the hospital, Franklin sat on the porch, arm cradled against his chest, harmonica resting in his lap. Sonny sprawled in a patch of sun, eyes closed, tail thumping gently. Across the street, two boys played catch, pausing now and then to toss Sonny a treat. It was peaceful, so ordinary, yet so precious. Franklin looked around, noticing the subtle changes, a new sign for a lost cat taped to the mailbox, but this time with a hopeful note. "Reward if found, but please don't hurt." And a phone number written in big, careful letters. Mrs. Alvarez, who once wouldn't walk past Franklin's house, now stopped to chat, asking if Sonny might visit her granddaughter's school to teach the kids about patience. In small ways, Oakwood was beginning to trust again. That evening, a few neighbors stopped by, bringing food and warm words. They asked Franklin to tell his story, to explain how he'd managed to break through Sonny's fear, how he'd found the strength to protect the dog when so many had only wanted him gone. Franklin answered honestly, his voice steady despite the ache in his arm. "It wasn't just me," he said. "Sometimes you just have to wait. You have to show up, even when it hurts. You have to believe forgiveness is possible, not just for a dog, but for a town, for yourself." They stayed late, trading stories, sharing memories of pets lost and found, laughing over neighborhood mishaps. The porch lights twinkled up and down the street. In the soft glow, Franklin realized the real miracle wasn't just Sonny's forgiveness, but the way the town itself was changing, one small act of kindness at a time. Later that night, as the moon climbed high, Franklin stood in his yard, arms still aching but heart light. Sonny pressed close, tail wagging. Together they looked up at the sky, a quiet promise passing between them. They had survived the storm, and now the whole town was learning to heal. Weeks had slipped by since that night of rain and pain, but for Franklin Reed, every day still began with the same quiet miracle. The once fearful golden retriever, Sonny, now dozed at his feet as Franklin sat in his modest living room, sun streaming in through the windows and lighting up the dust motes that danced in the morning air. The cast on Franklin's arm was a constant reminder of the risk he'd taken, of the moment he'd finally decided to step forward instead of standing aside. Oakwood was changing. Sometimes it was as subtle as a neighbor's cautious wave turning into a smile. Sometimes it was louder, children playing in yards again, people bringing found pets to Franklin's door instead of calling animal control. On the mantel, beside the faded photograph of Eleanor, her smile as gentle as spring rain, Franklin kept a new picture. Him and Sonny side by side, both wearing expressions that seemed equal parts pride and disbelief. The story of Sonny and Franklin had gone beyond Oakwood, picked up by local news, then shared online. Letters arrived from strangers, thanking Franklin for reminding them that not all wounds are visible, and that, with enough patience, healing could find even the most unlikely souls. That morning, Franklin was surprised to receive an invitation to speak at a community gathering, hosted at the local church. He stared at the paper for a long moment, his heart fluttering with nerves and gratitude. Public speaking was never his strength, but this felt important, like the next step in a journey he hadn't known he was taking. On the evening of the event, Franklin dressed carefully, smoothing the collar of his shirt and checking that the sling didn't look too out of place. Sonny sensed his nervous energy, sticking close, eyes shining with unspoken loyalty. When Franklin arrived, the room was filled with faces, neighbors, old friends, children, people from nearby towns. At the front, a spot was reserved for Sonny, who took his place with regal calm. Franklin stepped to the podium, notes trembling in his hand. For a moment, all he could see was a blur of expectant eyes, a sea of people waiting for something wise, something true. He cleared his throat, voice unsteady at first, but gaining strength with every word. "I spent most of my life thinking that pain was something you bore in silence," Franklin began. "I thought if you pretended to be strong, you'd stop feeling lost. But I've learned, mostly too late, that hiding pain only deepens it. Not just for yourself, but for those you love." He paused, glancing at Sonny, who looked back at him with calm trust. "Sonny came into my life when I was just about ready to give up on connection. He was broken, frightened, and lashed out at a world that had hurt him. I recognized myself in that. I spent a long time wishing things had been different, wishing I'd been a better father, a more patient husband, a braver man. But I learned that it's never too late to try again." Franklin's voice grew steadier as he spoke, his words carrying across the silent hall. He talked about patience. "There were dozens of days when I thought Sonny and I had lost each other for good. Days when I wondered if kindness even mattered. But each time I sat quietly, let him come to me, or just listened, the walls between us fell a little more." He looked out at the audience, seeing in their faces the traces of their own worries, their own regrets. Healing isn't a straight line. You can't rush it, and sometimes it feels like you're moving backward. But even when progress is so small you can barely see it, it matters. Franklin invited everyone to consider the wounds hidden in their own lives and communities. How many times have we written someone off, whether a person or a dog, because they bit back in fear? How many hurts could we ease if we showed up with patience instead of judgment? He challenged the belief that only grand gestures heal. Sometimes the smallest, gentlest persistence, leaving a door open, playing a song, offering a soft word, can change everything. It's not weakness. It's the kind of strength that saves lives. As Franklin spoke, Sonny rested his head on Franklin's foot, a silent partner in the testimony. Franklin shared the hardest truths, his regrets as a father, the ache of missing Eleanor, the shame of withdrawing from his family when they needed him most. "If I could change anything, I'd go back and reach out sooner. I'd tell those I love that it's okay to hurt, okay to need help." He finished with a simple plea. If there's someone in your life, someone hiding their pain, lashing out, or just lost, don't turn away. Don't give up after the first setback. You never know how much good your quiet presence might do. When he finished, The room was silent for a beat. Then, slowly, applause began to fill the space, rising and swelling until Franklin felt tears prick his eyes. He caught his son's gaze in the crowd. Jacob, eyes shining, a faint smile on his lips. Franklin nodded, feeling the gap between them begin to close at last. Afterward, people approached, some to share stories of their own lost pets, some to say thank you, a few to admit that they'd been wrong about Sonny, and maybe about Franklin too. The walls that had divided the neighborhood began to crumble, replaced by the tentative bonds of understanding. That night, at home, Franklin sat in his living room, Sonny snoring softly at his feet, a warm sense of hope blooming in his chest. He looked at Eleanor's photo and whispered, "You were right. Kindness is never wasted. It just takes time to see the difference." And in that quiet, Franklin realized the greatest lesson of all, gentle persistence, the courage to stay when others walk away, could heal not just one broken dog, but a broken man, and maybe even a broken town. Weeks turned into months, and the sharp edges of fear and suspicion in Oakwood softened, worn down by daily acts of kindness and the unexpected miracle that had begun on Franklin Reed's porch. The seasons shifted, and the town was changing, subtly at first, then in ways that were impossible to miss. Where there had once been fences and wariness, there were now open gates, friendly voices, and laughter drifting across shared gardens. The story of Sonny and Franklin, once whispered as a warning, was now told as a lesson in hope. On a golden evening in late spring, Franklin sat on his porch with Sonny curled at his feet, sunlight turning the dog's coat into a patchwork of fire and honey. Children played in the street, racing bikes and inventing new games. Neighbors, once strangers behind locked doors, waved as they passed. The block felt alive in a way it hadn't for years, a place where people looked out for each other, where the hurt and frightened were met with patience instead of judgment. The community picnic had become an annual event, this one special, with long tables set beneath strings of lights and food brought by every family on the block. A few brought their own rescued pets, dogs once feared or abandoned, now dozing peacefully under the tables or chasing each other across the grass. Franklin's son Jacob came with his own family for the first time in years, a quiet pride lighting his face as he watched his father mingle and laugh, arm still in a sling but spirit lighter than it had been in decades. It was Jacob who nudged Franklin gently and said, "You know, Dad, you started something here. I haven't seen Oakwood like this since I was a kid." Franklin just smiled, not quite believing how far they had all come. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft indigo, Franklin found himself at the heart of the gathering. Someone handed him a microphone, urging him to share a few words. He stood, nervous at first, but found his confidence as he looked around at the faces, young and old, black and white, families and friends who'd learned together that forgiveness was stronger than fear. "I used to think that being strong meant keeping my distance," Franklin began, voice warm and sure. "I thought if you didn't let anything touch you, nothing could break you. But I've learned that true strength is opening yourself up, even when it hurts. It's choosing to care again and again for the people and animals who need it most." He glanced at Sonny, whose head rested on Jacob's grandson's knee, eyes half closed with contentment. "Sonny taught me that even the most wounded among us want to trust. They just need someone who'll wait, someone who won't give up. And when you do that, when you show up with patience, when you choose kindness over judgment, you don't just heal a dog, or an old man, or a single family. You heal a community." The crowd was silent, listening, not just to Franklin's words, but to the change they felt in themselves. He continued, "We all have scars, We all carry something broken inside. And sometimes, it's easier to turn away, to shut people out. But the miracle isn't in the big gestures. It's in the steady, small moments. A meal on a doorstep, an open gate, a quiet presence when someone is afraid. When you do that, you make it possible for others to do the same. He told them about the days he'd wanted to quit, the moments when he doubted if his efforts mattered. It was always easier to believe I was too old, too late, too small to make a difference. But Sonny reminded me that no act of kindness is wasted. Even the smallest kindness, given again and again, can ripple out and change everything. When he finished, there was no need for applause. The smiles, the embraces, the happy chaos of the picnic were applause enough. Franklin found himself surrounded by neighbors, children, old friends, and new. People shared stories of their own rescues and small acts of bravery, of standing up for a bullied classmate, or helping an elderly neighbor, or adopting a stray from the shelter. The lesson had spread, woven into the fabric of Oakwood. That night, Franklin, Jacob, and his grandson sat on the porch together. Sonny nestled at their feet. The air was alive with music and laughter, the porch full in a way that had once seemed impossible. Franklin's heart ached with gratitude. He thought of Eleanor and whispered to her memory, "We did it. We made it home again." As darkness deepened and the last of the party drifted home, Franklin watched his son help Mrs. Alvarez with her groceries, saw kids comfort a shy new dog, and heard strangers greet each other with warmth. It was more than a neighborhood now. It was a family, forged in struggle and made strong by forgiveness. He knew there would always be moments of doubt, setbacks, and hurt. Sonny still flinched at sudden sounds, and Franklin still missed his wife with a pain that would never quite leave. But they had learned, together, that healing is not a solo journey. It's a collective act, something that grows stronger with every hand held out, every voice that says, "Me too, I want to heal too." As the night grew still, Franklin gathered his family close. Sonny lifted his head, eyes shining with trust that had once seemed impossible. Franklin smiled, his voice steady as he shared the final lesson with those around him and, perhaps, the world. Maybe there's a little Sonny in all of us. The part that's been hurt. The part that wants to trust but is still afraid. And maybe what we need, more than anything, is someone who'll keep showing up, keep waiting, keep forgiving. Because that's how healing begins. Not all at once, but in small, stubborn moments of kindness, over and over again. He let the quiet fill the porch, the warmth of his family and friends wrapping around him like a blanket. The legacy of patience and love would live on, in every corner of Oakwood and beyond, because one man and one broken dog refused to give up, on each other and on the world. If this story touched you, don't just listen. Be the person who leaves the door open, who waits, who forgives. That's how healing begins.